Welcome to Nuts and Bolts of New Ventures. Tonight we continue our journey. Let me just review where we've been, both for the class and for our guest, Ken. In the first session, I presented an overview of the questions and issues that entrepreneurs need to consider in launching a new venture. Bob Jones led us through the all-important thing of finding your customer, and he pointed out that to have a successful venture, the only thing you need to do is to create something that somebody wants, and this is called creating value. In the next session, Rich Kibble led us through business models. This is what you do in order to figure out how to capture some of the value you've created so you can do it again. If we create value and we don't capture it, or we don't capture enough, we won't have a success. And then Habib Haddad put together a great panel around people, and entrepreneurs came in and talked about all the issues they have with people based on their entrepreneurial experience. In this session, we're going to talk about what I call gotchas. That is, what are the things that may blindside you as an entrepreneur? Ken Zolot is going to lead us through the founders. What does it mean to really be an entrepreneur? What does that entail? Then we'll have a breakout session for about 30 minutes. We'll talk a little bit more of that right before then. And then I'll follow up with the second part around legal issues. Before we get going, I want to comment on chat. Chat can be very useful, a powerful way to continue the discussion of the content, but please try to stay focused on what is being presented. The TAs are monitoring chat and have been asked to inform the presenter if there's some uncertainty or clarification is needed. And we've had some complaints about some of the chat traffic. The TAs have also been asked to warn people if they see there might be abusing the chat, and to remove anyone who continues to abuse chat after that warning. So with all that background, I'd like to introduce Ken Zola, our panel organizer for the first part. Ken is a serial entrepreneur who has brought his experiences to academia. He's a senior lecturer at the MIT Office of Digital Learning. He's also a professor of creative entrepreneurship at the Berklee College of Music. And among other things, he's the founder of the Teams Initiative at the MIT Deshpande Center for Technological Innovation. I could spend 15 or more minutes telling you all about Ken, but I think I'd rather have you spend that time with Ken as he discusses the founder's journey. So without further ado, Ken, can you take it away, please?
Thank you, Joe. It'll be my pleasure. Good evening, everybody. Let me situate my slides for a moment. I'm going to use this plugin you've probably seen, which allows me to put slides right over my shoulder. So I don't know if you need to pin my video or adjust yours. The fonts you see here are about the size I'm going to use. So if you can read this, you are in good shape. I've had the pleasure of being a close friend of Joe's for many years, and I might start by saying that if we talk about the founder's journey, you are in good company, not only with Joe and Joost and all of the people who are presenting this material to you. I know most of the presenters, but in just looking around and seeing some of the names of folks who I've met in my travels at MIT, I think one of the most important parts of this experience, as you've probably discovered, is not that you're going to be spoon-fed a series of instructions to follow, but that you're immersing yourself in an environment and in a community where magic will happen. And I hope you're making the most of that and working with people between classes, building connections to the folks who are speaking. I'm glad Habib was here last week. I'm going to build on some of the things I understand he talked about. I've heard him talk a lot about founding team dynamics and issues, and that's what I'm going to focus on as well. A little more by way of who you're going to meet tonight. I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes or a half hour, and then I'm going to turn it over to 3 students who are going to tell their stories. And they're all in slightly different stages of development with their startup, which we'll get into in a little bit. I'll show this slide again later. but just as a warm up of what's about to happen. Also, a little more about me. Joe summarized this nicely. My primary gig here these days is to teach entrepreneurship to freshmen. I think that's what I love doing most. And that's where I've really started to specialize lately. I came to MIT, gosh, 35 years ago to be part of a thing called Project Athena, did several startups, developed a specialty in fintech and enterprise information technology. So I was basically a geek who turned entrepreneur and then came back here to mentor other technology-focused entrepreneurs. And as Joe mentions, I, about 5 years ago, accepted a new faculty visiting appointment where I teach entrepreneurship to musicians, and I invite Berkeley music students to MIT to collaborate with our engineers. I love talking to people, and my email is at the beginning of this talk. I'll post it at the end, so you can Google me. I don't hide my contact info. Just email me at zolot@mit.edu, and I would be happy to chat with any of you. So given Joe's summary, I'm glad he actually teed this up in what you talked about last week, because you've already discussed, just to reframe things, sometimes I like to describe the core 3 ingredients that most of the guests are probably going to talk about. And I distill those down into the question of, what is this thing you're bringing to the world through your startup? My favorite question, which is who cares, which is the customer or the market size. Who is it who cares about this technology you've got? Why do they care? How many of them? All the questions you're familiar with if you've studied product market fit and market analysis. And then why us? And I want to focus on this third one. And if you go to a pitch, or if someone approaches you for funding or mentorship, they'll invariably lead with one of these. Like the why us one. Maybe they'll say, oh, guess what? Elon Musk just retired from Tesla, and he's going to join my team, and I've got Warren Buffett backing me. And I've got all these really cool people who are my co-founders. And, you know, before that person has said too much more, they kind of have your attention. Those are some really cool people. And you don't know what they're working on. You don't know who they're going to sell it to, but you know they got some really compelling people working on something interesting. So that's sort of the team lead. Sometimes here a customer or market lead. You know, we've got the cure for the common cold. Everybody knows that a cure for the common cold is a big deal. There are a lot of customers out there who care about that. Who I am or what I've got. And then the third category is sometimes you hear people leading with technology. They say, oh, look, I've just arranged this carbon nanotube in such a way that you can get it to move within an 1/8 of a degree more precision than any other carbon nanotube in the world. And, you know, if you understand the complexities of that technology, it's a really big breakthrough. But you don't really know who wants this yet. And you don't really know who the founding team is who's going to bring it to fruition. Any one of those introductions might be a compelling way to start a pitch. And when you evaluate whether you want to work with co-founders, you're going to hear one of those 3 pitches. There are plenty more, but for the sake of quick simplification, most fall into one of those 3. There's business model stuff and design stuff, which we could get into, but I want to focus on the team. By the way, another fun way of showing this trio of questions, I had the great pleasure of having Drew Houston as a student who went on to found Dropbox. He came to me, by the way, with his idea, and I told him it was the stupidest idea I ever heard. So I'm very proud of my reputation in picking winners here. And Drew came back to guest lecture at my class, and he talked about these 3 phenomena. And he said it's sort of like drilling for oil. You know, you have to have a working oil drill. The thing has to actually work and be able to drill and go at the right speed and all that stuff. You have to be drilling over a spot where there's actually oil. And the people operating the thing have to know what they're doing. Now, in some cases, you can get away with only 2 of those 3 being the case. You know, usually you have to have all 3 going pretty well. But I want to focus on the team. do these guys know what they're doing, and why are they there? And do they like each other? And what do they care about? Why do they get out of bed in the morning? Are they going to keep showing up for work every day? What's their intention? And the first tool I like to think about when coaching students about how to think about the founder's journey, this sounds kind of trivial, but looking in the mirror, I ran headfirst into startups as soon as I could. I just sort of was wired that way. I really wanted to do it. And, you know, if I took a step back and thought, what am I doing here? Why am I doing this? What am I actually good at? Where do I need help? Maybe I'd have never done it. So there's a point at which you don't want to do too much reflection. But just taking a look at what makes you tick, or to use some fun language of the course you're in now, you know, are you a nut or a bolt? And can you simplify it to a number of categories? And the reason I call much of my teaching practice, I nickname my classes the Founder's Journey, is I see this as a journey where the founder is a protagonist, that you are on your own quest, that the center of gravity for your destiny is something that you are in command of. And that may seem obvious as well, like most of us want to be responsible for our destiny. But when you're founding a company, you have a unique opportunity and responsibility to really grab the helm and figure out how you're going to steer yourself and your co-founders and your customers and your vendors, your investors, through an odyssey of sorts. And really looking at, why are you doing this? And what's your source of propulsion? Why do you keep moving? People often ask me, because I've mentored a lot of startup founders, is there some pattern I see? Is there some trait these people have? How can I tell the ones who are going to be successful? It's usually a source of propulsion. There's something about them. They just keep going, and they know how to go. They're not always going in a straight line either, but they just seem to know how to always be moving forward and taking the next step. And there's sometimes even a mystical quality about it, a higher calling, a sense of personal intention. And the reason I mention this mystical or mythological aspect, another reason I call this the founder's journey, is a way of paying homage to one of my favorite books I read as a teenager by Joseph Campbell, Hero with a Thousand Faces, which is used as an archaeology anthem to some extent. And it points out, and this might be a little hard to read if you simply Google this book, it talks about the journey of almost everybody who we consider a hero in our world. And there's a very similar arc to the story of pretty much every hero, religious deity, somebody who's minding their own business, gets called to action, leaves the comfort of their ordinary world, falls down the rabbit hole. Alice in Wonderland is a wonderful example of this. Falls down the rabbit hole, enlists the friendship of shaman and tour guides and others, has a near-death experience, figures out how to pull it all together, and then comes back home transformed and spreads the goodness with their original community. It's a great oversimplification, and obviously not every startup founder is this exact arc, but startup founders have their story arcs of where their journey is going to go. And the Joseph Campbell Arc is a fun one. If you've never read this, it's one of these sort of iconic works of literature that is worth knowing about. And it's a nice way to think about the odyssey you're setting off of. So that's the more mythological side. Let's get down to some hard numbers. For the hard numbers, I'm actually going to just briefly pause and look across the screen at the teaching assistants, because with this Zoom world, for all I know, I've been mumbling the whole time and nobody can hear me. People have been trying to get my attention. I see some smiles from the people who have their cameras on. I take it everyone's alive and well and you can hear me. Good. I see a couple thumbs up. So let's go over some numbers about founders and their motivations. And my source, I gave you my source of mythological research. My source of academic research on this is an old friend of mine named Noam Wasserman, who used to be at Harvard Business School. and is now at Yeshiva University. He did a stint at USC as well. He wrote a book called Founders Dilemmas, which talks about all of the forks in the road you have to navigate while you're on this journey, and how people aren't always equipped to handle them, or how people need to think through different frameworks for handling them. And he looked at the causes of failure in VC-backed ventures. And almost invariably, 2/3 of the time, the failure was a people problem. The founding team hadn't sorted out what he calls the 3 R's: relationship, roles, and rewards. And he's got extensive research on this that is really well documented in that book. I'll show you one simple little example. Here's an analysis on whether you found a company with family members or close friends, or random acquaintances who you know reasonably well, or past coworkers who you don't know that well. And the likelihood of discussing what he calls elephants in the room, difficult issues that might blow up a company, is lower with good friends and family members. And yet the damage to you in your relationship, if the company blows up, is highest in that setting. So there's a little fire icon there that shows that's sort of a hot zone, a danger zone. Founding a company with a loved one or a spouse or a sibling might seem like a good idea, or a best friend might seem like a good idea, but interestingly, those relationships are not well set up to discuss difficult business challenges. It's obviously harder to fire a spouse. Not that you want to fire any old colleague anyhow, but there are all kinds of anecdotes like this. And that's not to say you should never start a company with a loved one, but it's to say that if you're going to do it, you should understand these dynamics. The other critical dynamic for understanding your motivation as a founder is what he called his rich versus king trade-off. He's actually gotten some grief about not being gender friendly and calling this king. I'm using the word king generally. I think he changed it to rich and royal because of that, but king is more concise, and I think it's more fun. King, queen, prince, boss, use whatever name you want. The general trade-off there is that some people want to make a lot of money and some people want to be in charge. And you can't really do both of those. In studying founding teams and startups year after year after year, the people who think they can both be in charge and be wealthy are usually going to stumble and fall. And when you think about some of the famous founders, I mentioned Drew Houston, the young tech inventors who start a company and ride it to a great exit. So Drew is one, you know, Elon Musk is another, though the jury's still out on where the exit is. Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs. I'm actually running out of fingers on my hand. There's 7 billion people on Earth, and I can't name more than a handful who are well-known technological founders who also rode the company to a massive financial success. The point being that ordinarily, you're good at something early on, and you have to kind of check that out and figure out, okay, I've reached my saturation point for what I'm good at, and that that you have to bring in others. And knowing your appetite for that is an important part of this dance of knowing how you're going to be as a founder. Here's a quick quiz to test your appetite for being rich or royal. And this is obviously a silly quiz. This is a mathematically identical 2 sets of answers, but there's something different there. And I won't bother you all with going through I won't put up a poll and make you all type your answers, but I bet it would not be a unanimous split at all. And which of you would pick A and which of you would pick B, and why? And the notion of being in charge of your destiny on a small island, having 100% in scenario A, versus giving up control and autonomy, but being part of a much bigger thing. And most have to face that. And that's one of the most critical and fatal founding team dilemma problems that founders face. And I'll just show you as a tease the other core dilemmas of when the founding team has to figure out a really important issue that founders are not usually aligned on. Let me take a quick look at the clock. I am going to talk for a couple more minutes and then introduce my founders. I'm going to show you this wrap-up slide on research. And the point is not to tell you that this research is accurate or for you to figure out where you sit on this chart. My point is to show you the words out there, and that when you study founders and startup companies and what makes them work and how entrepreneurs think of the world and how non-entrepreneurs think of the world, these words have meaning. And figuring this out with your founding team and understanding what you're going through is an important part of making sure your founding team is going to get through these dilemmas as smoothly as possible. So with that, let me take a quick peek at the chat. Yeah, there's some great comments here. Someone pointed out that when I mentioned that we haven't famous founders, that doesn't mean they're not doing really well and that they weren't tech founders and also really wealthy. Fair enough, good point. The famous ones we read about in newspapers or blog are the ones that I can't name anymore of. I'm sure there are plenty of people out there. My point is that it's really hard to sustain a venture over a really long time, especially a technological founder. The other question on young versus more experienced, that's a really tough one. Actually, the research shows that more experience is better, and that people who found companies in their 30s or even 40s and 50s often have more successful exits. That said, often you have the guts and the energy to do it when you're younger, and when you stop to think about it carefully, you might lose your momentum. And there's something to be said for diving in without knowing what you're doing and getting beat up a little bit and learning some lessons. So I want to shift to a few students to talk about this, because rather than me give my opinion, because I'm old, I'd rather you hear it from some of your peers. And interestingly, when I reached out to some of the students who I wanted to present, they all have a life in coatings, which is sort of cool. At a place like MIT, where we work with lots of material science and mechanical engineering, they're coding different things. We have an example of coding windows in buildings for energy savings. We have an example of coating surfaces with thin solar films by printing them. And we have an example of fingernail polish, of coating fingernails with chemicals which are less toxic to the environment. And those will be represented by our three guests. And let me just look around the room, or maybe I'll ask one of the TAs if they noticed. I saw 2 out of 3 of the panelists appear. I'm just looking to see if Elise is here. Elise, you are there. Wonderful. Thank you. Nice to see you again. I am going to turn off these slides. I don't know if you have slides to share, but feel free to unmute yourself and say hello to everybody. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. How's everybody doing today? Like thumbs up, thumbs down? Oh, that's awesome. That's like more energy than I expected at this time of day. So I love it. I'm just going to share some slides here. Yeah, so just kind of a high level from my background. I graduated in 2020 from the mechanical engineering department with my PhD, working actually on the foundational technology for AeroShield. So during my PhD, we were going out and talking with industry, trying to get feedback to understand how to make our research even more impactful. And along the way, we started to learn a lot of things about the barriers for this technology in the industry. And that was what actually got me into the entrepreneurial bug, and now leading AeroShield full time. So I thought I'd start by just kind of going through a couple slides, giving you the basics of the context of what I do at AeroShield, and then also share a little bit of my journey and what I think I can speak to for questions and things like that. So first, really excited to be here. and really excited to share what we're working on because, as we know, buildings are such an important part of our lives, especially these days. We spend a lot of time at home, and windows are such an important part of our productivity, keeping us happy and comfortable. But they come with this huge sacrifice, and it's actually $40 billion in energy wasted every year because of the windows that we put in our building. And this is a really challenging problem to solve because when we think about the kinds of materials that we have that are transparent and insulating and lightweight and affordable, the list gets pretty thin. And so what we have is a market that when we look at what consumers want in terms of, what's that thermal performance, your thermal comfort, your energy bill savings, compared to how much it just costs to get that window inside of your home, we find that there's this separation in products, which is there's the standard double pane, which is more than 85% of new products installed because it's just the most cost-effective way to meet building code. And that these more energy efficient products, people just can't afford to buy them because they take decades to pay back on that investment. And they cost tens of thousands of dollars in additional upfront cost. And that was a problem that AeroShield really felt that we could solve. By bringing a new material to market, we could enable all of the great benefits and cost effectiveness of the double pane design while having that really long-term, durable, sustainable performance comparable with a triple pane. And so how we do that is with this amazing material called silica aerogel that is one of the most insulating materials in the world. Super lightweight, super insulating, really cool stuff. But as you can see from this picture, it's definitely not a nice, clear material that I want inside of my home that's stopping me from looking out on my beautiful views. So what we did during my PhD was study the nanostructure and 5 ways to actually make it clearer than glass. So for the first time, you have this unique combination of super insulation, ultra clear, ultra lightweight, and it's glass, so it's more stable to things like temperature and UV degradation. And that means that when we put this material inside of a window, we get to unlock amazing performance using all of the existing manufacturing and distribution channels. We can just upgrade double pane window manufacturing to be 50% more insulating with a 5 times faster payback period. And this is huge because not only is it massive, thousands of dollars of energy saved over the lifetime of each window, it's also a huge amount of carbon emissions that we can avoid. So pretty excited about this because it's, I get to work on a technology from my PhD, and I've been able to grow, from just one person looking at this concept to developing a roadmap for how do you actually now get this material to market. And so we did a lot of customer discovery, went through things like the I-Core National process, talked to over 200 people in the industry so far and still running. And that's allowed us to put together this plan to address the biggest barriers to getting a customer and getting useful revenue, which is to demonstrate the manufacturability in terms of size as well as cost. And so it's really exciting because not only have I been able to grow in my role as CEO, grew up in a small town with a passion for this environment, went to get my PhD in mechanical engineering and had no idea that this would be where this led. So got in there to just learn the technical and have that environmental impact with the skills that I felt that I could bring. But as we went through this development and talked with industry, really understood the nature of the problem, and it became a challenge of not only could we solve this, but if we don't, who's gonna? So it really was this idea of a calling to impact with this technology. And now that's led to us, being able to get into a lot of great programs that support us. I've gotten a co-founder with me who's, helping us drive this forward, as well as expanding our team to include another recent MIT grad who's helping us, really as a core team member. And so every day I get to wake up and work with these people on what I think is a real problem and make really meaningful advances. So really excited to answer any questions.
All right. Elise, thank you. And if you want to unshare your slides so that people can see your face or maybe some of the others more carefully. And there are questions in the chat about the reliability and performance, but I might encourage people to talk less about the technology and the market acceptance of it and stay focused on the aspect of this. In fact, I've asked all the panelists, and maybe Elise, I'll just ask you first to talk about what it was like to realize you were about to start a company and who you were going to start it with and why and when. Like, what was it like to come to that moment and actually take the leap off the diving board?
Yeah, yeah. So I think one part is I had this, fantastic opportunity, particularly at MIT to, I think, try it on for size many times as I grew in the role. So, certainly as I got into, the meat of my PhD and started to lead the project and was doing the customer discovery, that was kind of this moment where I realized that this wasn't going to be supported explicitly under any work, at MIT. And so if I wanted to go out and get these results, it was going to have to be added time to the core. So I think it starts with this translation of an opportunity into almost like an excitement or sometimes even a responsibility to pursue. And then as I started to try and convince other people that this was a problem worth solving, I started to convince myself. And as I convinced myself, I also found where there were, holes in my thinking, in the business plan, or saying, yeah, we're going to have to manufacture. I don't necessarily have that expertise. So now what do I need to look for? And as you went out and started to ask advice about, how do you find a co-founder? What do I do to address this investor concern? And talking with more and more people, I started to grow. You find the support in the community. And, before I knew it, I had people who I slowly had convinced over time to help me more and more and iterate with me on the project. And they became my advisors and my co-founders. So I think there definitely was a moment when we won our first prize money and said, oh boy, now we actually have to do what we've been planning. But I think the realization that we were founders kind of happened, it grew on us, or we grew into it. So it was a little bit more organic, but I always felt that was maybe, I think, Ken, to your point, a little bit of ignorance is what let us jump into it and say, yeah, this is what we want to do. And by the time we knew better, we were so excited about where we were going that it was worth it.
And there was no turning back. By the way, I see more questions in the chat, and I see one or two you are using the raise hand feature. What I might want to do is do a little rapid fire introduction to all three students, and then be able to have group discussion, and you can address your question to one of the students after they've told their story. And Elise, that's impressive that you dove in, and and when you talked about you coming to the realization that was just something that was the best way to get it out there. That's a good lead into Richard, who's our next speaker. And I was talking to Richard yesterday, catching up with him, getting ready for this. So just to spare you any suspense about what Richard's company is, Richard doesn't have a company. And he's been going down this journey where he's got a really compelling technology that he's worked on in the lab and was evaluating relationships with co-founders and investors and prospective customers, and hasn't figured out whether or how to pull the trigger, and may well not do it. And I think that's a great case study to have here, because it's easy to bring in, Drew Houston and talk about, look at how great Dropbox is. But those are the rare counterexamples. The norm is more that people toil away for a long time to figure out, is this really the time to do it? Do I really have a mature technology? Do I have co-founders I like? And that's why I'd love for you to hear from Richard, who's been really interesting technology and is still at the point of jumping into it. So Richard, I hope I didn't give away too much of your story, but I thought that was important framing.
No, it's good framing. Thanks, Ken. I'll share my screen and I guess give the basis of what we're talking about. So as Ken mentioned in my little intro, so I'm actually still a PhD student. I should have mentioned that first. I'm at the last semester of my PhD. I've been geared up with my committee to graduate this June. And my PhD work for the last 6 years or so has been on flexible solar cells. I'm not going to talk too much into the details of the actual technology and market, but just to give like a little bit of an overview. Today, next slide. Yeah, today silicon solar cell dominates the market. We all like renewable electricity because, again, it's renewable, it's clean, it's not dirty like oil. But the reality is that solar is starting to become extremely centralized. In fact, China produces about 99% of all silicon solar panels today. And the reality is, that's not innately a problem, but when you start to peel back the layers of the onion, silicon as it stands today is not the best technology to be using for this purpose. It's very expensive. It ends up being only really economic to manufacture with state funding through economic development zones in China, which is why it's centralized. So it's not really the best that we can do. So what is better? I think it's flexible solar. It tends to have a lot of benefits to it relative to what we see today. So it's flexible, very easy to install. We can put it on any surface. It simplifies the supply chain largely because we use a lot less materials. You know, this is a business card that I made throughout my PhD. It weighs like 1/100th the weight of an actual silicon cell. The materials that we use today are actually more efficient, so that you get higher efficiencies, but also you get more energy yield throughout a given day. So you're actually generating more electricity through the sun. But the reality is when you move to these new technologies, manufacturing becomes really, really challenging. We transition mostly from a top-down manufacturing process to these types of technologies, which are bottom-up. So it's much, much more difficult to do. That's the crux of the work I've done here. So I've largely moved to trying to simplify and cheapen the manufacturing process. That's what I have IP on here. And we're really interested in using these sorts of low-cost printing processes. And so just to give a little bit of a video, sometimes these videos don't show up well on Zoom, so happy to send out the link later. But we develop chemistries, me and the rest of the researchers in my lab, in order to print these very efficiently and fast. And so this is just a sample video. But a lot, especially recently, it comes down to, well, how you actually do this. It turns out there's a lot of contract manufacturing and people this can provide high value for. Printing processes today are used for very simple things like images, but you can think of doing joint development agreements with various, these are all in the Northeast, so very local contract printing manufacturers to produce high value products. And so we have now potentially a structure where we have technology innovation that's now leading to a new business innovation specifically for energy. And that's where I was originally thinking this value could come into play. The problem though is a lot of things. It's probably not really going to end up that this will be taken forward by me. And there's a lot of fundamental reasons why. The first one is I don't have a founding team. So as Ken mentioned, usually in terms of funding and a lot of different agencies, you have to ask the question, why us? And a lot of people are asking the question, why you? I have spent a lot of time in the last 2 years or so in the entrepreneurial system here at MIT with PIs, lab members, collaborators, various networking events in local places here. I took new enterprises. I led an iTeams team last fall, and then did nuts and bolts last year as well as this year. And I still don't have anyone throughout all that experience that would join a founding team, or at least people that I trust to that level. As I kind of mentioned, China owns this market right now. And so I personally believe there's value to be gained with this technology, but a lot of people don't. They think that silicon solar is going to be the dominant technology now and in the future. I don't have any funding either. Both lab funding is going away for me, and there's no additional private funding. And then the last thing is that there's been a lot of difficulty with stakeholders. So specifically in the US, what I'm thinking of is that the United States Department of Energy controls a lot of small business grants, and then VC funding after that tends to follow those. My research has been privately funded up till now, so I don't actually have a lot of DOE contacts. And so getting into that network that I can actually have a path of funding forward has been really actually quite challenging. It's been kind of a stopgap. That's it. I'll leave it there for now. I'm only supposed to spend 5 minutes. Hopefully I didn't go over. Yeah, thank you, Ken.
No, that's great. And you did get a request for the video link, by the way, to the cell printing video. And you had a quick question in the chat about the acronym PI, which is indeed principal investigator. The person guessed the right answer is generally the senior professor who runs the lab, who's often an important part of a founding team, or at least has to be involved in some sort of advisory role. And by the way, you could all take this as a challenge. Maybe some of you want to try to connect with Richard and figure out if you can get the momentum going to get this started. That's why I like this. This is a live case where it seems like there ought to be a company there, but the pieces haven't come together yet. And there's a lot of good pedigree behind this and potentially some important problems to be solved. Though, Richard, maybe if you would just talk a little bit about your skill set and aspirations in a job that you would take on. Like, do you feel like you're someone who would want to run a company around the clock, or would you bring someone on to do all that work and you would just do the technology in the background?
I've always, I've said this throughout all my pitches here. I see myself as a better technologist than I do like a CEO position. I think it's just innately my personality. I don't think I mesh up extremely well with being a CEO. I don't know if the company grows, how well I would, take a CTO position forward to that. A lot of founders, just, getting into the statistics, a lot of founders, especially CTOs, will transition into like senior scientists rather than stay as CTOs. So I think I can do that, but, I have to learn through the process, I think.
By the way, that's a cool virtual background you have. I take it that's a human hand. Those are fingers holding one of those printed business cards you were showing earlier.
Yeah. This is so. These are actually my hands. I do have.
And it's a nice way of branding. You got the word MIT there right over your shoulder, and you have an example of your product, and it's kind of catchy.
It's it actually, so unfortunately it was non-functioning. So there were 7 1-inch cells here in this module, and it was unfortunate. Each one of them had a single shorting pinhole when I made it at the time, but it's a nice demo nonetheless of what potentially the technology can look like.
By the way, for those of you who might be planning for our long-awaited arrival on campus, those MIT students have been displaced because of COVID. One of the first things I recommend doing is checking out the Nano Center. To the extent it's a beautiful building on campus. It's just a few years old, where a lot of this work takes place, and it's quite a sight to behold. And maybe, Richard, if you want to send along some links and things, including a link to the Nano building and your background and the video you showed. And you will stick around for more open Q&A. I just, again, want to do these rapid fire and move on to Ashley Ann, who is going to talk about nail polish and her journey as an entrepreneur. So Ashley Ann, are you nearby?
Yep. Hello.
Welcome.
Hi, everyone. Hi, I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, sorry, just give me 1 second. Okay. Can everyone see and hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. Yeah, so hello, my name is Ashley Ann Thomas. I'm a current senior studying mathematical economics. And my co-founder, Dave Kisakamuru, and I decided to start a beauty company. Okay, so before I sort of get into like sort of our journey, I just sort of want to get into what we do. So essentially, through like tons of primary market research, interviewing, just observing people's behavior, we found that a lot of people live with family, significant others, and they're in sort of like closed spaces where they don't necessarily have a lot of time to themselves. I mean, they're constantly interacting with each other, whether they're like in the living room, in the bedroom, kitchen. There's people around. And when you are a user of nail polish, this is a really big problem because the smell is very disruptive. So whether you're in the living room, TV room, and you try to paint your nails, usually someone smells it and ends up complaining. And based on our research, people who are users end up having to either go outside, in the bathroom, or other inconvenient places to paint their nails. Obviously, the relaxing manicure experience is disrupted, and the awful smell still lingers. So after, sort of thinking about this problem, seeing that this is a problem that a lot of people have, we decided, we start to question, why does nail polish smell? Does it have to smell that way? And is there anything we can do to sort of solve that problem? And this is sort of the technology we use to address it. So currently we developed a water-based nail polish. So it's not based in solvents like alcohols and nitrocellulose, which are the culprits for the awful smelling nail polish. It has no toxic odor. We added scents with benefits like lavender and bamboo to enhance the relaxing manicure experience. And it's also eco-friendly. So through tons of like trial, and like iterating, we managed to like develop this product. So this is like our water-based technology. So sort of how we got there and how we like started. So obviously this is a problem we found within a market, but it originated with a problem I had. It was a sophomore year of MIT. I was supposed to be coming back from the summer, and I was packing my bags. I was very disorganized. My nails were chipped. Everything was like sort of all over the place. My parents were like yelling at me to get in the car. After I threw myself in, I said, okay, I'm from Jersey. Boston's going to be a 4-hour trip. I have plenty of time to paint my nails in the car. We were on the highway. The minute I opened the bottle, my dad's like, just put that away. I do not want to smell that. It smells horrible. And it was just like not a good experience. So the car obviously smelled awful with nail polish. My nails were chipped, and it just was not a pleasant experience. So from that moment on, I did market research, like I said before, found that this was not an issue that I had, but many users of nail polish have. And I wasn't really sure whether I wanted to necessarily pursue this because, again, I didn't really encompass like the stereotypical image of an entrepreneur. So it was sort of something that I was sort of like dabbling with for a bit, but I didn't have the confidence at the time to pursue it. But in January of 2019, I accidentally, sort of fell upon a program to start MIT, Martin Trust Center, learned a lot about a lot of the resources and the tools. And I was like, okay, well, this is something that I think I can do. It was an amazing program. I learned a lot and gained like a lot of friends and a really great network. And after completing Start MIT, we continued into Fuse, which also further built our skill set. And after doing those programs, be part of BMS, Sandbox, et cetera, we definitely knew this was something we wanted to do. So I was sort of, I talked with people, within the program here and there, but I didn't necessarily find a founder or like a co-founder until I happened to run into Dave Key in the hallway because we were supposed to be going to like a pitching competition or like a pitching event, and she was lost. So I was like, oh yeah, I happen to be going the same direction. So we end up, walking to the event together, chatting a little bit, and then at the end we chatted again and found that we shared very similar values and we had complementary skill sets, and we sort of start working on it together. And then summer was really the time, or this summer was really the time where we really sat down and really, start really developing the technology and really like getting things going. Technology part was, it was a lot. Water-based technology for nail polish has been a dream since like 1982 for so many companies. However, it was very technologically challenging. Water, there's color dispersion issues where like the pigment would separate, or because water obviously doesn't evaporate as fast as alcohol, things wouldn't dry as fast. And then there would be that, sometimes there would be like longevity issues and adhesion issues, and you'd have to like find the right polymers. So we, had to talk with so many companies to figure out what polymers would work. We talked with different professors and different stakeholders. We had to, do so much reading with literature to try to figure out, okay, how exactly do we do this? Because like unlike, let's say, lipstick or lip gloss, there really isn't like a blueprint for like this. So really figuring that out was like a lot. Dave Key, she was talking with suppliers. I made my basement our little lab. And we just really went from there. And yeah, so we were able to, come up with a decent prototype at the end of the summer. It still had quite a few glitches, so we had to continue developing it in the fall. And then, fortunately in the fall, our sandbox funding was extended. We continued like validating, our market. And then recently we just launched, and right now we are really just trying to continue understanding our customer experience. So for the people who are using our product, we're really focusing on how are we communicating? Are the instructions clear? How are they experiencing? And ultimately, now that you have polished without the awful odor, how has that really changed your experience? So right now we're continuing to look at our beachhead market. We're learning a lot because ultimately, interviews definitely tell a lot, but ultimately it really depends on who wants it most. So we're definitely learning a lot. We're even, looking at exploring different markets as well. But yeah, it's really more about, okay, now that it's out there, how are people responding to it? What are their priorities? Because we have our priorities, but what do people sort of like most? And that's what we're doing currently. And with all our efforts, we finally have a result. So these are like our 3 nail polishes that are now sort of our finalized products. We finally came to this stage, and I'm always going to keep this because like this was like as a memory, but like this was our very first prototype, and as you can see, it was a complete disaster. Like it's like white, the pink powder's all over the place. It's a mess. So for those of you who are like struggling with like prototyping, it's definitely a process. So yeah, these are our results. We're super excited, and thanks. And if anyone has any questions, especially about the journey, decide whether you want to do it or just anything, especially cosmetic chemistry, please like let me know. So, yeah.
And I'll take the first question, then we'll open it up to everyone and for all 3 panelists. But actually, you're the only undergrad of the 3, and most people, by the time they're toward the end of their grad studies, are reasonably able to balance their time. But being an undergrad at MIT is a 24/7 operation. And you're also co-running this company. How's that going?
Yeah, so it's definitely a lot. I think being on Zoom class has definitely given us more time because like we're not actually going here and there from like classes, but it's definitely a process. Like Dave Key and I have like meetings at like 2 a.m. And it's just a lot of sleep. We're working on that, but definitely just, yeah, it's definitely a lot of work, and we try to, I wouldn't say we're balancing it the best. We're trying to like get as many, like so many things done. And she, obviously doing her master's, and like balancing that is like definitely a process.
And you mentioned you met her somewhat serendipitously. You saw each other in the hall or waiting for some. So were your instincts right? Is she a good co-founder? Do you like each other? And obviously, I don't want you to say anything embarrassing about her, but how do you answer those questions? And how do you think she thinks about you?
Yeah, so Daichi and I, like I said, we have very different personalities, which is definitely not a bad thing because she's more extroverted. She likes, just go out there, put herself out there, do things like that. So sometimes I'm like, oh my goodness, I can't believe you did that, Daichi. But no, she's very extroverted. She's very outgoing. She's definitely a go-getter. And I'm more obviously, I like to be in a lab, introverted, creating stuff, really just like thinking about content, etc. I think that it's really important for your co-founder relationship to have complementary skill sets. And I think it can be a little difficult sometimes when you're working with someone who's so different. However, I think it's what has to link both of you together is your value system. So even though you go about life different ways, you value the same things. So like even though Dave, she loves going out, tennis, skiing, all this stuff, and I like am like indoors, etc. I think we value the same things, and I think that's sort of what really like holds relationship together. But yeah, I think we get along really well, and we always tell each other we've never got along with someone this well in a working relationship, and I think we are honest with each other, and anytime we have disagreements, we go about it in a very diplomatic way. And we just really step back and say, okay, what is this about? Is there really a right or wrong here, or is it just a matter of like different perspectives? So yeah.
And if you were to expand the team and add a 3rd person or maybe hundreds more people, do you have a sense of what kind of personality they ought to have and how you would decide that and who would do the recruiting?
Yeah, so in terms of personality, I would say someone who's probably, I think right now, I think the work ethic is really important. So Dave and I, we both, we're both very passionate. We work really hard. We would look for someone who's into like social media, so who likes social media content, things like that, or who's looking at business model development, because that's sort of what we're looking at. Because essentially, it's like, okay, we're like sort of doing this we're doing this test now, but ultimately, what in terms of like expanding, scaling, things like that. So that's what we're looking for currently. But ultimately, if anyone who's like really interested is just really who wants to work hard, because at the end of the day, like Dave and I wear so many different hats. So like sometimes, I'm a scientist, creating stuff. Other times, I'm doing social media marketing. So other times, we're dealing with like, polymer suppliers and trying to figure out how we're going to get, everything in one place and coordinating things like that. So yeah.
That's great. Thank you. Let's open it up to more general questions. Though while people are getting ready to ask questions, or you could type in the chat. I noticed, by the way, somebody put in the chat, this is a great resource. There's a well-known resource about so-called founder dating published by First Round Capital, which I don't suggest you read right now while you're in class, but it's a good thing to download and read later. And also, I make a fun observation. I began this talk quoting our former colleague, Drew Houston, who's now running Dropbox. And those of you who've seen him give a talk about the founding of Dropbox know that he was going on a long ride from Boston to New York, and he thought he was going to bring his laptop with him and do all his homework. And it turns out he had left his USB drive home. He was on a bus, and all of his PSETs, all of his homework were on this USB drive. And he was totally annoyed with himself that he had this car ride when he wouldn't be able to do the work he was hoping to do. And he thought, I never want to lose my files again. And I want to come up with a system where I can synchronize all my files across all my devices so I don't have to carry a USB drive. And he sat there on that bus and wrote the first lines of code of what is now Dropbox. And apparently Ashley Ann was in a similar situation in a car, thinking she was going to use nail polish, only to find that that wouldn't work out, and that motivated her to invent this company. So the moral of the story is you should go on a long trip and have something go wrong, and then figure out how you can write something to solve the problem. I'm mostly teasing, because these are what I call scratch your own itch innovations. And in some cases that's good. But back to the question of whether you're better off founding a company when you're young or you're old. When you're young, the itches you have are a little more predictable. Like when I ask young MIT students what idea they'd like to see brought to fruition, most of them are about, how can I find friends who want to go to the club later? Or how can I figure out where the nearest restaurant delivery service is? Or how can I sell my used textbooks? Or how can I optimize my student loan? There's a defined set of problems that young students have, and there are way more problems in the world, which if you have some time to go out and be employed or work with people who are working with really complex systems, you'll have a chance to identify more profound problems in some cases. So let's do open Q&A. I know I'll watch the chat and I'll try to moderate. And I know one of you had your hand up during Elisa's talk, and I asked you to wait until after. Have you re-raised your hand now, I hope? And I think Zoom puts your little squares in order of when your hand was raised. So actually, I see you now. It was Kave. Is that how you say your name? You were the one who wanted to ask a question of Elise. So go right ahead.
Thank you so much. And I mean, this is open, I guess, to anyone. Do you have any concerns developing IP in an academic institution? Does MIT get a piece of that? How do you navigate? How do you navigate all of that?
That's a great lead-in panelist answer. I'll just point out that I think Joe's planning to spend the whole second half of the class talking about that. I don't know, Joe, if you're...
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about licensing from MIT in the second part of the class. But go ahead, I'd like to get the real experience.
You have one of the preeminent experts in the world, Hadzima, who is helping to run this. So that's a great topic to be interested in with Joe around. And Joe, do you want to manage taking down people's hands after they've answered? Are you the host of this Zoom, or whoever is the host, if you want to make me host?
Yeah, well, so Sam is the the TA Sam is the host. He's got the
Okay, looks like he's on top of that. Yeah, so anyone want to take a shot at that? Intellectual property? Maybe we'll go in reverse order. Ashley Ann, was there any MIT inventions involved in what you did, or was this personal innovation that you did with your own time?
So this was like a personal innovation. So I think initially, we were thinking of doing things in MIT lab, but after like talking with professors and things like that, they're like, it's just best for you to like sort of do it on your own just so you don't run into issues. But we definitely didn't run into any sort of IP issues with MIT. Yeah, that wasn't like an issue for us. It was more about sort of how we protect our formulation and like trademarking. That was more of a concern for us.
Yeah, and yours was an example of more a personal passion that might have involved some technology at MIT, but you didn't birth this directly out of a lab. The issues where this is more complicated and you are more beholden to intellectual property agreements with MIT is if you've just spent the last 5 years of your life as a research assistant to a famous professor who's got all this grant money coming in from and government organizations, and you've built something that's been funded by those grants alongside with that professor, that's a complex ownership equation, which MIT can help you navigate, and there are some ground rules about. But in Ashley's case, this was just something she did on her own while maybe she was physically on campus, but wasn't deeply immersed in any one particular lab or source of research funding. Richard is a little more entangled in that regard, I guess. Richard, do you have IP issues with your work?
So the IP, I have 4 disclosures to TLO, 2 of which have had patent applications, and the third I'm updating now actually to try to get a 3rd application in. In general, MIT's patenting process is pretty seamless, but I think that's not, when holistically talking about IP and patents, that's not usually where the issues lie. I think in high tech, the bigger issue is actually freedom to operate, given your the patents you have, the patents you don't have, and then like kind of what the rest of the field is doing. That's a lot harder to navigate, I think, than just having like licensing a patent. The licensing, especially at MIT, it's cheap relative to a lot of how a lot of other schools do it. So it's not that big of an issue, in my opinion.
And Elise, I think you went through that, right? Did you license IP from MIT?
Yeah, so the core patent on our material, we have an option on it, which is like a cheap way to get a period of time at which you get the opportunity to exclusively negotiate licensing rights. So basically just buys us enough time. We pay a little bit of money for that and hash out some of the agreement. And now we get 12 months from the time that we sign that agreement to develop the technology before we take on that full licensing agreement. And part of that is really important because even though the core technology came out of MIT, there's a lot of work that we have to do around AeroShield specific IP that we generate in a very different lens from the fundamental. Now we're commercial and manufacturing. And that helps kind of steer the market and what the value of our material actually can be made for, and a lot of those specifics that go into the licensing agreement. That was really important to us to make sure that we could have those discussions really fairly. But I mean, from my perspective as a researcher who was paid to work on this project, that IP was very clearly defined, owned by MIT. And it wasn't until I was actually done with my employment at MIT that we actually really negotiated around the option agreement and what licensing would look like, just so that there wasn't that overlap and conflict of interest where I could be, doing things at AeroShield or in my research that might cause an issue. So it definitely was something that we had to consider. And we did actually make some developmental choices about not trying to develop, things while there was any potential for conflict.
Yep. And that again goes to your personal aspirations of a founder. Sort of if you were the person who wanted to own 100% of something small, as opposed to a small percent of something large. If you're someone who wants to own 100% of something small, you probably don't want to get involved in licensing agreements with MIT because MIT is going to be sort of your partner for life, because they're going to own the patent, and you're going to be at their, I shouldn't say at their mercy. I mean, they're at your mercy too, because you're helping make the technology have an impact on the world, which is their ultimate objective. But it's going to be a two-way dance the whole time. And that is an example of deciding whether you've got the personality to want to constantly be working with other entities and doing all these complex negotiations. Some people just want to have complete control over everything and run with it. So let me look at the hands up here. I hope that Zoom is giving them in order. I see Clara has her hand up.
Yeah, I had a question for Elise. Since your foundation of your startup was at MIT while you're doing your PhD, but you've since finished your PhD, it sounds like. So what has been like the level of support you've gotten from MIT now that you're finished with your PhD there, in terms of the TLO office helping you? Or are you kind of off the hook now for support?
Yeah, I would say that, part of it is going to be definitely dependent on, the idea and the relationship. Heard a lot of stories from founders with technology either out of MIT that they had a hand in creating, or were just taking out of the university. And, I think the TLO does a really good job of trying to understand your specific case and come to the right working relationship, I'll call it. So for us, the nature of what we needed to do was really, my goal was, we had scoped out the project for my PhD, and you write the proposal. And so it was very obvious where MIT's kind of domain was. And we knew that the work that we were setting up to do after was very much large scale manufacturing and techno-economic analysis and design of systems that just wasn't in, kind of the scope of work. So I think in a lot of ways we had support for the fundamental, and we had upfront conversations with my advisor very early on, and she chose not to be a part of the business because that was a kind of a personal discussion and her alignment of interest. So she ended up being incredibly supportive, and I think also facilitated having, good conversations with the TLO, because she understood that the work that we had done there's a lot of potential there, but none of that really can be harnessed until we have the other pieces, the other IP that AeroShield needed to spin out, create, and put together. So they've definitely been open to conversations, but at the same time, it really is, AeroShield is outside of MIT, and the value that we're creating now, that's our value because we're doing the work to put in. And so MIT's involvement very much is limited to the scope that they do best, I think, is how we've tried to structure it. But yeah, it's a great question, and that might not be the answer you'd hear from another technology or another business model.
And you get a range of answers from different founders who've worked with different patents and different licensing arrangements too. And even though that's a fascinating topic, since Joe's going to talk about it, and since I want to focus more on sort of the interpersonal dynamics of founding teams, I might ask, even though this is fascinating, that we hold off on discussing intellectual property and licensing too much more right now, and talk more about the individual journeys of the founders involved and how they know they're in the right team and how they know what they're wired to do. Let's go to Ken.
Awesome, thank you. So I had a question for Elise. So I think building envelope efficiency is such an interesting topic, and it sounds like you guys have created a better product than the current Windows out there at a cheaper cost. How did you think about navigating the pricing of the windows?
Yeah, so I think I'll kind of bring this back to actually relevant to our founding team. So part of our core mission in getting started with this was we kind of had the conversation about we saw this problem, we could solve it, and we really felt like a big reason people aren't making good decisions is because they just can't afford to. So it was kind of part of us looking at it saying we want to have a positive impact with the skills that we have, and this just seems like an opportunity that's so ripe for it. So the caveat that I throw is the estimates that we have, this kind of mission, it is a big, long vision, and we really had to sit and align ourselves. I think that there are, many different opportunities that somebody could have taken this technology with. And, part of that initial discussion was, why are we in this? Why do we want to do this? And it was, this technology has value, and there are technologies behind it that are not being developed because people have looked at this core material because it didn't have the great optical clarity material properties. They've said it's not worth commercializing, and we feel differently. And we feel differently to the degree that this material or whatever comes after it, whatever foundation, even if we, can't make it past the next month, we feel like what we've done is brought attention to a problem and to a way to solve it that is needed, that needs attention, that needs to be developed. So, you know, when we priced, we looked at what do we have to do to get people to make a change. And that was actually the bounds that we put on. So instead of saying, you know, this is what we make our material and this is how we want to capture the most value at a first pass of should we pursue this, was in the long term, can this fall within the range of making people buy energy efficiency products for a low cost, because that will drive sustainability in the industry. But again, like that's kind of unique to us. And you know, I also keep the right to change that, because being successful, there's also a huge value in that, successful early to build a foundation for expansion versus, you know, trying to get to a really low margin product first. So that's a whole business model conversation probably for another day.
All right, I see a duet here, Sophie and John. I'm not sure which of you has the question, but take it away.
Thanks. We both have the questions, but this is Sophie. I'll ask. So Ashley, your idea is really interesting, and we want to know a little bit more about your go-to-market strategy. How do you reach your customers and also engage with them or get feedback from their user experiences?
Yeah, so initially we sort of reach out to people we've previously interviewed or people we think that have the issue most, because I think it's really important to have people who are very excited about the product and like engage with the product. So essentially we reached out to people who we've interviewed, we reached out to people we know who like use nail polish, and we reached out to family members and like friends, and then just to like get that sense. But definitely I think people you interview, try to find like an angel customer. So people who are very excited about the product, people who are very excited about a solution, and sort of work backwards from there. Because once you get people who are very excited about it, they'll, you know, want to engage with you. They'll want to like tell you all about their experience. Like we have, you know, quite a few people who buy a lot of nail polish. So I definitely would like go that way. In addition to, in terms of like continuing to expand, I think we're definitely looking at influencer marketing. Because one of the tricky things about sort of beauty, it's not sort of enough to like just, you know, run an ad and people just see the product. A lot of it is like trust and like brand affinity. So even if people sort of want what you have, if they don't really know who you are, that could be an issue. So we're definitely looking at you know, influencer marketing. Dave Key, you know, has reached out to so many influencers thus far, just to start to build up that brand and like trust affinity. And that's sort of how we plan on going from there. But yeah.
Great, thank you so much.
And I'll pull a question out of the chat for Richard. Richard, you spoke of the challenge of finding a founding team you really wanted to work with. What do you think is about that? And someone else in the chat started to answer it for you. I don't know if they're replying to that. Oh, you answered it yourself.
Yeah, I tried to answer a little bit of it.
So, yeah, do you want to talk through that?
Yeah. So it's hard to know exactly why I can't get someone. Personally, like what I would think of to be the best relationship, like at least as a starting point, would be my own academic lab. My PI is supportive. He doesn't want, so at MIT, when you become a founding member of a company, you can no longer work on the research any longer. So Vladimir, despite being really supportive of this idea moving forward, doesn't want to be a founder. So that's the PI issue. He still wants to be doing this research and getting research funding for solar. The grad students and postdocs that I've worked with generally want to be academics. They were hired to publish and do more academic things in the pursuit of a professorship. A lot of those people have told me that they would be supportive from a like academic point of view in this moving forward, but they don't want to take the founder role. Same thing with research scientists. Have very good relationships with a research scientist here who used to work at Kanarka back in the early 2010s on OPV. He wants a stable job. So that's another person who doesn't want to be a founder. And then the rest of the people I've met, there is a lot of people who just simply believe that silicon solar has too much velocity and momentum, and they're too indoctrinated, I think, with that field being prominent. So it's hard for them to kind of wrap themselves around doing something new. So that limits them as well. Yeah, I don't know if I have a better answer than that.
No, that's a great answer, and it's a great challenge to the room. It might well be that you've just met your co-founders in this room. Maybe people will reach out to you after. And with that as an invitation, we are going to wrap soon. I promised Joe we'd wrap at 7:20. I think he's going to give you a break and then has some other material. But I will, several of our panelists have put information in the chat already. Joe has links to their LinkedIn profiles. If you can look anyone up on the MIT website and get their email address. But we will all be glad to mediate an introduction. If anyone has trouble meeting the panelists, just write to me and I'll be happy to help get you in touch. So thank you to all my panelists. Thank you to Joe for hosting us. I hope this has been informative. And I look forward to working with you in the future. So with that, Joe, are you going to announce the next steps?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Ken. Once again, a great panel. You touched on a lot of really, these are real issues that founders face. And do you want to put a pitch in for your Founders Journey class, or?
Yes. So that's a freshman seminar. The only one I'm running next is a freshman seminar, which has a pretty pre-baked admissions process. So I don't know that it would help if people wanted to sign up for it. The class I will put a pitch in for is a seminar on the nature of learning, especially given all we've learned about Zoom and distance learning and open courseware and edX and all this stuff. It's about EdTech innovations. I'm typing the subject number in the chat. It's an obscure subject number. It's a special subject in mechanical engineering. Write to me if you want to know more about that, and I will send more details. It's primarily for MIT undergrad. So if I were going to pitch a class, that would be my next adventure I would pitch.